Hello, Midwest House. I'm a little embarrassed to admit how many times I've practiced that, so I hope it came off as cool, calm, and collected as I was hoping for. I hail from the great Midwest state of Minnesota, which means that basically I spend my entire life just trying to sound like I'm not from Canada. So, my name's Lindsay Guentzel, and I am the host of Refocused. It's a podcast that I launched in May of last year that dives into the incredibly complex world of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I'm one of the many humans who found themselves with a later in life ADHD diagnosis. Anyone else there? Anyone else? Yeah, great. Here's where I pitch you. I've got podcast equipment here. Come on the show. No, I'm being dead serious. Like as a journalist, I would never say take an interview without doing your due diligence unless it's somebody like Gail King. But I'll give you just a little bit of the backstory. So we have mental health professionals who come on the show. We talk to people who are working in the neurodiverse community all the time. But we also tell other people's stories, individual stories. So back in October, we told 31 stories over the 31 days of ADHD Awareness Month, which is in October. So if you're doing the math, that's a different person's story every single day. And one of the things that I realized is how incredible it is to be able to connect with someone who sees you, who you can see yourself in. And so if you're out there and you have some interest, I am here till Monday. I've got some podcast rental equipment and we should chat. We've got an incredible panel just ahead for you on mental health and the entrepreneur with 4 guests who represent both the longevity and the rise for tech entrepreneurs coming out of the great state of Michigan. 3 of whom I've had the pleasure of collaborating with through Refocused ongoing partnership with ADHD Online. And now that it's official and I can say it without worrying about getting in trouble, Mentavi Health. I'm so excited to be here with you guys to be moderating this conversation for a number of reasons. It's very fitting in my life right now. I've had a very chaotic couple of months, and last week, as I was back up in Minnesota, getting my coordinating producer, Phil, ready to take over while I came down here, I had a moment where I went, I am an entrepreneur. When did that happen? And there was this moment when I stepped back from Minnesota Public Radio last year to take on this project and all of the things that came with that. And you have this realization that you can't go at it alone because the only way to really move forward is to have a team of people in place to help you. And you guys, that's a lot. I've only been an entrepreneur in my head for a week, and I swear to you, it is so much work. So kudos to all of you for taking this on because it's a blast and it's a challenge and it's what pushes all of us, but it can be taxing both mentally and physically. But it's one of the many reasons why I am so honored to be included with the 4 boldly courageous pathfinders that you're going to get to meet and hear from today. I'm so excited to get started with Keith Brophy, Chief Operating Officer at Mentavi Health and ADHD Online, someone who I've been really honored to get to know over the last year. I joked with Keith that if we didn't have enough time to get through his bio, that there wasn't enough time on stage for that today. But I do know that we have a big contingency of people down here from Grand Rapids, and I know that every single one of them knows exactly what I'm talking about because every community has a Keith. And I guess what I should say is that every community should have a Keith, and the ones that do have a Keith do better. That outside the box, but somehow practical thinker that is steady and shows up, but even better, pulls up or keeps up or finds a space or a window where it didn't seem like there could ever be a window. That leader who finds people and fuels their potential, someone who truly understands the importance of building up everyone around them. Because early on, these type of leaders, they've learned that the quickest, most efficient way forward is investing in the people who would not only build the plan, but those that would take over the plan once the next stage had been set. Here's where I challenge you, if you have one of those leaders in your lives, if it's in tech or not, I encourage you to go back to wherever you call home and tell them about that, because that's the only way that we're going to get more leaders like Keith Brophy. Or you could do what I did and you could come down and host your first panel at South by and then tell them over a microphone in front of a bunch of people and, hopefully not make it awkward. But Keith, you're great, and I'm really honored to get to work with you, and I'm so excited to kick off what we have in store for you. We're going to be here till 3 p.m. We're going to talk all about mental health and the entrepreneur. And as I mentioned, we're going to kick it all off with Keith Brophy, Chief Operating Officer at Mentavi Health and ADHD Online.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was a great opener. I really appreciate it. I noticed at the start of your remarks, you said we have a panel that represents longevity and the rise. I would be the longevity piece of that as the more seasoned guy on the panel. But I wanted to set the stage for the panel discussion to follow on the entrepreneur in mental health. I'm not a clinician, but I am somebody that's spent much of my career in entrepreneurial endeavors. And I currently work at Mentavi Health, the mental health telehealth you're going to hear more about. But let me set the stage by taking you guys back to a very significant week in my life that was almost 25 years ago. And this was during the era of the dot-com boom. I think it highlights some of the mental health challenges that are out there today for entrepreneurs. At that point, I had a fast-growing tech company. We were seeming to hire more and more people with each passing week. And I was certainly living the classic entrepreneur life, high stress, adrenaline-driven, sleep deprivation. And it seemed pretty normal. It was very hard. But as I looked around at the other entrepreneurs I was friends with, the other founders, they were pretty much in the same boat. So every week was jam-packed full of meetings, customer breakfasts in the morning, business lunches, happy hours with partners, and meetings in between. But this one particular week sticks in my mind because of three meetings I was quite excited about because they were with three fellow entrepreneurs for different situations. I've slightly disguised their identity, but it's an important story to hear what happened that week. The first of those three special meetings with the entrepreneurs that I knew I could connect and identify with was with a referral partner, somebody that had a complementary fast-rising business, and we referred business back and forth. I really admired his confidence. Like he was the guy that was always on top of it, so confident. And we'd had a number of meetings, sometimes over beers or coffee, but for this meeting, he came into my office, walked in and closed the door, and he burst into tears, sobbing so much he could hardly even talk. And when he finally collected his breath, he told me that he was about to miss his payroll the next day. He'd exhausted every avenue, and he wanted to know if through my business we could front him $100,000 to make his payroll. So I very painfully and awkwardly explained that we didn't have the capacity to do that. And I still remember that sight of him walking out of my office, his body again racked by just heaving sobs. His business closed its doors a couple days later. He totally removed himself from the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I never saw him again, although not for lack of trying. But that taught me that confidence is no guaranteed protection for the entrepreneur against catastrophe. The next meeting that I had looked forward to of the three was with a potential merger partner, another founder of a fast-rising business, and we'd had a number of talks about potentially bringing the firms together. One of the attractions was he had a very calm, soothing style, kind of unflappable. And so I went to meet this fellow entrepreneur for the next step conversation at a restaurant, but he wasn't there. So I waited some more, drank some more coffee, waited some more, went to the restroom, waited some more, and he was a no-show. That happens all the time. I didn't think too much of it until I reached out to his team, and they didn't know where he was either. Eventually, we got the story. He left. On the spur of the moment, he left his company, he left his home, he left the city, he left the state, he left his life, essentially, and just went off to the other side of the country to start a new life because he couldn't take the pressure anymore. Back then, his team described it as the nervous breakdown. Today in mental health, we have a much better understanding of situations like that and much better terminology. But essentially, he reached his coping break point and was done. And even though he was a good friend too, I never saw him again after that break point. The third and final story of this setup of that very impactful week was a meeting with an entrepreneur who I had never met before, but I'd heard a lot about him. He had a business that was fast rising, and his business was complementary too. He had a solution that it seemed we'd be able to work on together to take the next level. So I'd reached out to him for a meeting. I was eager for this meeting because he was known to be a hard-driving entrepreneur, high work ethic. And I thought, I can really identify with him. We'll probably really connect. Except the meeting never happened. That one, I got word before the meeting came up that very sadly he'd committed suicide. And that underscored to me that no matter how hard driving one is, it does not guarantee you won't run into a wall of hopelessness. That business ramped down soon after. Those three stories had an impact. It definitely underscored that building business is risky business. It's risky financially, but it's also risky emotionally. So we can ask ourselves, given that that happened 25 years ago, is it much different today? Those lessons shaped my career. I often still think of my friends and the price that can be paid by hard-driving people who are kind of wired that way, including myself. But if we look at the stats in 2023, we can see that the Center for Disease Control says in the general population, 1 out of every 5 Americans will experience a mental illness per year. It also tells us that mental illness across the board is on the rise: anxiety, depression, ADHD, PTSD. If we dial it in to look just at entrepreneurs, the numbers are even more stark. A recent research study showed that 72% of entrepreneurs are experiencing mental health challenges. And entrepreneurs have 6 times the rate of ADHD, 3 times the rate of bipolarism, twice the rate of addiction and depression. So stark numbers. It's hard to say how much that has changed over 25 years because the data back then does not allow a real solid comparison. But one thing we can say is the problem remains. Entrepreneurs are driven, typically work long hours, especially in the high growth stages. It's very high stress. There is some upside. The mental stigma, while it remains for mental health issues, it has reduced over the last couple of decades. There's much more awareness of the value of stewarding one's physical and mental health. And there's a lot of resources out there that are available, from community resources to resources like the 988 Suicide in Crisis Prevention Line. Those are resources that if anybody here knows anybody that's struggling, I'd encourage them to seek out. The objective of our panel today is to talk about this issue and raise awareness. Raise awareness that it exists, raise awareness that there's coping mechanisms, and to raise awareness that there are resources that can help. So ultimately, our hope is that very tough week that I described from long ago is not a current state, but just a relic of the past. And with that, we'll move on to the panel.
So I'll let our 4 panelists pick a seat and get settled in. You obviously met Keith Brophy, Chief Operating Officer at Mentavi Health and ADHD Online. Next to me, I've got Zach Booker, the CEO and co-founder of Mentavi Health and ADHD Online. I've got Dre Wallace, the founder of Opnr. Then I've got Keith Chaney, who is the co-founder and CEO of Peadbo. And I gave them a rundown of how we were going to do things, and I'm going to throw them for a loop because isn't that the life of an entrepreneur? And I figure with all of the funding that they've probably been doing over the last months, weeks, years, they're used to this. So we're going to do like the quick little elevator pitch. And many years ago, I had to do one where they had a gong when the 60 seconds went off, and you got gonged in like a room full of people and it was awful, and I don't have that for you today, so I promise that. But Zach, let's start with you. Obviously, I'm very familiar with the work that ADHD Online is doing, but real quick, just take me back to the moment when you and Dr. Randall Duttler decided that the model for how you could treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder could be changed and should be changed, and what motivated you to get that started?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Thanks to the Midwest House for hosting us, and thanks to South by Southwest as well. Great question. The beginning of ADHD Online started in 2018 when Dr. Duttler and myself were talking about our ADHD. So I have it, he has it, his son has it, my son has it. And we were talking about the complexity and journey of being able to navigate the diagnosis process. It takes about 7 months on a national average, once referred by a physician, to see a psychologist and go through those mental health assessments. Costs upwards of $2,000, even after insurance. And then the complexity of taking time off of work and school, taking your child out of that, and waiting for a child for that whole year is just, it's disheartening at the support. So we wanted to create easier access. So, and good luck with the 60 seconds, because I like to talk. So we ended up creating an asynchronous assessment, allowing a doctorate-level psychologist to understand the mental space of a patient and diagnose them in less than 3 days after submission of the assessment. And that accelerated pretty fast. We had significant headwind going into COVID. Once COVID hit, telehealth was automatically a validated modality to be able to get your health care. So that's the tailwind in which we rebranded to ADHD Online, offering diagnosis and treatment. And then with the demand and funding, we were able to continue our efforts and increase the amount of people that we were able to support to understand what's going on in their mental space. So we're very excited, and into Mentavi's now new brand this year, where we now encompass not just ADHD, but anxiety, depression, and other mental health disorders. So that's it.
And just fair warning, we have two Keiths on stage. I don't know how that happened, but I'm going to clarify to make sure that we know exactly who we're speaking to. Keith Brophy, you were one of the people that was brought on to ADHD Online to help take it to the next level, and we are going to talk about that. But tell me a little bit about Mentavi Health and the future of what you see and what it could do.
I described some of the statistics about the mental health crisis in the United States and the increasing prevalence in diagnosis of conditions like anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, ADHD, and beyond. Mentavi was created to address that need, springing from the good work that Zach did in launching ADHD Online and reaching out into so many patients, over 130,000 served so far. We saw a broader opportunity to make impact, and also many of these mental health conditions are interrelated. They don't stand in distinct singularity quite often. So.
Dre, I'm going to move on to you. Dre is a phenom. Scares me a little bit because I'm always like, what is she going to do next? She has shared her story on the podcast. So if you are like, hey, I was pitching them, if they wanted to come on the podcast, Dre has been on the podcast. She can vouch for me. But let's talk about what you're working on right now and what was the motivation behind getting it started.
Sure. The name of my company is Opnr, and we are nothing like what that is, but we're actually a two-sided marketplace that is designed to remove some of the annoyance, irritation, and frustration that is part of the talent booking process. So for talent booking, whether it's for live performances or appearances, we use data to actually do some matching between organizers and talent to be able to make the process much simpler, more cost-effective, and also just a lot more inclusive. And this sort of got started. It's a really long story, and I will not belabor the whole thing, but I've been a professional musician myself for almost 17 years, and so I've lived this story both on the artist side and also on the organizer side, like as a promoter, and also just in the business side. And it's it's hard enough. If we want to talk about what mental health is like for entrepreneurs, well, most musicians are entrepreneurs. So it's hard enough just dealing with the pressures of the industry. But then on top of that, you also need to make a living, and everybody makes their living usually from live booking. So just that piece of it and the pressure and everything that goes along with it, we really wanted to be able to streamline that process some and just make it more equitable for everybody.
So you said that your company is nothing like ADHD Online and Mentavi, and then you literally were just like, but we're making life easier for entrepreneurs, and isn't that kind of like the whole purpose? Which is the perfect segue into what Keith Chaney is doing with Peadbo, because this is something I had never heard of, and I have to tell you, so Keith is the one person on the panel that I hadn't met, so we connected last weekend, and we just had a great chat, and I was talking with some of my friends in the entrepreneur space, and they were like, this is amazing because you're providing something that for a lot of people feels out of touch. So tell us a little bit about Peadbo.
Sure. Peadbo is actually shorthand for Personal Advisory Board. It's exactly what it sounds like, in the same way that pretty much every company you know has a board of people with diverse skill sets to help them accomplish their business goals. We believe that each of you individually should take that approach to identifying people you either respect or admire or look up to hold you accountable and to support you on your personal or professional journey. The concept itself isn't new. You know, I've met tons of people that talk about their mentor circle or their go-to people, and even Wall Street Journal has a recurring segment about the personal board of advisors for all these rock stars in business. I was actually in advisory board meeting for a company I was consulting for, and I just had this thought, like, shit, I need one of these for my life because I don't really know what I'm doing. That thought turned into notes, turned into a few slides, turned into me poking my co-founders, and we started to build the platform.
So let's talk a little bit about the current market. And I say that knowing nothing about it. I am a production team of 2. I have a coordinating producer, Phil. I mentioned him earlier, and we just chug along day to day. But I know that I have a really hard time staying in the present moment and working in the present moment. And then you have all of these other things coming at you. And I love to catastrophize. Anybody else? Like, everything that can go wrong will go wrong, and we're going to go big. We are going to go real big. So I'm curious, and Keith Chaney, I'd like to start with you because I know that layoffs play a role in your journey right now. So tell me a little bit about the tech layoffs, what you experienced, and kind of that, I guess we'll call it like pushing the baby out of the nest, like the baby bird. You're just like, all right, we're going to do this.
Yes. So for the first year or so of Peadbo, I was juggling. I was working with my team to build the platform, but also working at Google on their partnership strategies team. As you may have heard, mid-January, Google laid off about 12,000 people, and I was one of those people. And so to your point, I can clearly see how it's both a blessing and, a catastrophe. The blessing being not very many startup founders are in a position where they have 6 months of severance, where essentially Google's paying me to build a startup. That's amazing. The scary part is 6 months is a very definite amount of time, and so the clock is ticking. So I find myself trying to raise, trying to build, trying to sell, all while this clock is ticking. And I'm not the traditional 23-year-old startup founder with no responsibilities. I have 2 daughters. I have a mortgage. I need to be able to pay myself. And so I'm dealing with some mental health struggles as I try to manage both sides of that coin.
Dre, I'm going to toss this one to you next because I know you've always had a lot of projects going on, and I know that Opnr right now is a main focus for you, but it always hasn't been that way, and the change to that has been kind of dramatic. I mean, if you follow this woman on social media, I do not know how you keep everything straight because it is constant. So tell me how you have balanced some of the what ifs and the unknowns over the years and still kind of tried to stay in the lane of making sure that you're focusing on what you want to focus on.
It's kind of a hard question, but I think even if, to me, I feel like everything that I've always done has been related. Even though it might not look like that to other people, like there's always method to my madness. I have to explain this to my parents a lot too, but I really do. There's things out of each piece of thing that I do that is usually tied together somehow. So whether it's me working for a different company and gathering skills that I could use for mine, or whether it's applying certain things from side projects to Opnr. Like everything is still sort of connected in some way. Oops, sorry. Everything's still sort of connected in some way. And so as much as it probably seems fragmented and crazy, it doesn't feel that crazy to me, also because I've always kind of done multiple things, but always had them kind of tie together somehow.
Zach, you mentioned COVID and this influx of people not only just looking for mental health in the teletherapy capacity, but also looking for testing for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We're not through COVID, so to speak. It's not over, but some of the restrictions or ways to make life easier that were put in place during COVID are either coming to an end or they're changing, which means that your company has to adapt. And not only does your company has to adapt to follow these very, very highly regulated rules coming down from the US government from multiple different places, but then you also have to make sure that you're educating your patients in a way that works for them. And anyone with ADHD knows executive function, not sometimes our strong suit. And so you're changing things on people and expecting them to adapt very quickly, because you can go to the US government and be like, hey, yeah, so ADHD, it's sometimes hard for people to follow tasks in a row, and now you're changing everything on them after a couple of years, and it's not going to really get you anywhere.
All right, we're back on. So, great question. That's a loaded question. Thanks for reinstating the fear back into us having to adapt so quickly. But yes, COVID has introduced a waiver that has allowed Americans to be able to use telehealth in a more free way. Well, the genie's out of the bottle. We figured it out. It works. It creates better access. It's less expensive, and it's much faster to be able to provide the outcomes to patients. And now we're coming back into normality with the regulations that will then be reinstated, I believe, May 12th. So May 11 is going to be the end of the PHE, the public health emergency. And then everything goes back somewhat to normal. With that, as entrepreneurs do, we have to adapt, and we have to adapt now. So it was quick. There were a lot of pivots over these last 4.5 years of growth. There hasn't been a week where you're like, I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like. So it really allowed me to say, I need smarter people around me. I need to be able to have the right people by my side that has complementary skill sets to my weaknesses. Because as an entrepreneur, we tend to want to do everything ourselves because we feel like we own the vision, we see it, we know what needs to be done. But ultimately, the smartest entrepreneur surrounds themselves around smarter people. So if I'm the dumbest one in the room, I'm in the right room.
Keith Brophy, I'm not playing the veteran status card, but I'm going to play the veteran status card because I'd like you to kind of reflect on your career. You mentioned, you went back to that week 25 years ago. What have you learned about managing some of the unknowns in this life of building something that sometimes has no stability behind it?
Well, I've learned a lot over the course of a number of fast growth startups and other endeavors, and I think I've paced it well in my career because this is an amazing journey working with Zach and for Zach and in support of his vision, because we really can have broad reach and make a difference in lives. It's a great journey. I think some of the lessons I've learned over the years are to listen carefully to the team you build. The team is usually the most connected to the mission of the business. And over the course of various endeavors, I've found again and again and again, listening to unlikely voices can really pay off. Some of the best ideas that I've had in growing businesses, and this might sound like a bit of a hype, but it's really not. Some of the best ideas have come from the receptionists, because they see the pulse beat of the customers and the team and the business. But collaboration, teamwork, and creating a space for ideas and trust to thrive. They used to call that just building a good team, but nowadays that's called building an emotionally safe space. I think that's a much better term for it. If a team leader can build an emotionally safe space for their team where there's trust and listening and empowerment, they'll move mountains. So I've learned a lot of those lessons along the way.
I have to imagine there's a lot of stress that comes from trying to find funding. Keith, you mentioned a mortgage and 2 kids and trying to pay yourself. Dre, I know you've been in the thick of it, jumping all over places, being in different showcases and trying to garner attention. How do you manage the rejection side of it? Because you're so passionate about what you're working on and you see the potential and you have to get in front of people and many of them are going to tell you no. What is that like and how does that sometimes show up in life in ways that you wish it wouldn't?
It's crazy. And there's really no amount of prepping. Like both Keith and I were actually in Techstars together and they spent a lot of time talking about how to deal with that mentally. There's still not really anything that can prepare you for it. But the best thing I can say is like you almost have to treat it like it's a game, because as much as like, yes, we are the ones in the seat who need that funding, and so it feels like the power dynamic is just really, really off. They have also raised a fund and they have to deploy those funds. Like they have to do it. Like they have to invest this money on behalf of these other people who have, put money in these funds. So they have a job to do, we have a job to do, and so it actually can be more equal than you feel like it is. And so when you talk to them, it's like you almost just have to be like, if this doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's just like dating. It doesn't mean that like just because you go on a date with somebody that like you have to marry them. Like maybe you hung out one time, you see it's not it, and you keep moving. And so it's the same thing with investors. Like even if you think that this is the one, like there's thousands of them out there that might be a much better fit. And so I think the best thing you can do is just kind of treat it like it's a game and like really just pull the feelings and emotion out of it. So now at this point, I have no feelings when I'm in these meetings. They are gone.
Keith, Chaney, from the dad perspective, I mean, like loaded, that's a lot. And not only are you trying to make sure that you're providing for your family, but then you're away from them a lot.
Yeah, that's not the best. But I'm very intentional about stating and sticking to like my negotiables and my non-negotiables. And so while I am, trying to build this company and being rejected all the time and having my confidence challenged, I'm gonna make sure I make time to read to my daughters, to watch Encanto, to just make sure that there's a very clear boundary between the business and my identity and what's important to me, because there are so many external factors that I have no control over that are going to play a role in the fate of Peadbo, but none of those factors care about me and my family. And so I have to prioritize them, because to everybody else, we're just a company that they have a call with and they're gonna make a decision. And so I have to maintain some type of balance, and that includes texting Dre and us complaining about, how these VCs keep moving the goalposts, saying they're pre-seed, but then saying you need a bunch of traction. And I think even that, hearing that other people are going through this and having that encouragement, especially from our class, which I think is pretty tight. We boost each other, we send forwardables, we try to help each other to make the connections. Even if we get a no, it might not be a no for Dre, so let me make sure they know Dre's on the radar. And I think just building that community and really taking my medicine in Peadbo and making sure I have my board, to support me as I go through this craziness. It helps me, and just knowing my daughters don't care. Like, they don't care I got rejected. They think I'm cool most of the time, and that's enough for me.
I mentioned when we started that I had this realization of realizing like I'm an entrepreneur. I kind of have a production company. It doesn't have a name or anything, but the last 2 months have just been pure chaos. And today I'm here, and on Tuesday, I got a call that I have an autoimmune muscle disease that they've been trying to figure out for 2 months. Long story short, I went on a hike. It did not end well, and here we are. So I've had this crash course in one, letting go of power and control so that people can help me, and two, advocating for myself in real time. And as I was working with my producer, who I trust him so much, but it's so hard to let go because it's your baby, and you just can't do that. And Zach, I want to bring you in on here because this was a big moment for taking ADHD Online to the next level. You had this idea, you built it to where you could get it to, and then to get it over that hump, which every entrepreneur, every business owner, anyone who's doing something that is big and grandiose and takes a lot of work, you need to bring people in. And that takes being able to allow that to happen, which is not easy for a lot of us who have control issues. I am one of them. So I would just love it if you could talk a little bit about that mindset in that moment, because I do think that, and, we touched on this a little bit last night as we were just sitting right over there having a chat about this. A lot of companies that are no longer around are gone because whoever was in charge couldn't handle this transition.
Yeah, very true. So I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years with over 40 companies post-revenue. Many of them have failed, many have succeeded. However, the failures I've learned so much with. And I've really built that up to seeing that I didn't have the right people in the right seats, the right people around me to take it to the next level. And I wanted to take that education that I couldn't have learned in a university and take that and apply it to the next idea. Thankfully, with ADHD Online and Mentavi Health, I have the right people in the right seats. I've got the right investors, but I did it at the right time. So I did it when we were profitable and debt-free. That's the best time to raise money because all the leverage from an investor standpoint is gone. You don't need the money. I raised the fund to try to get people like Keith Brophy on the end here to help me because as the co-founder CEO, I was doing everything, cleaning the toilets too. So at some point, that becomes an overburden, and you're just detrimenting the health and future of your own business and idea. So for that, for my mental space, for my mental health, I needed right people like Keith Brophy and the rest of my C-suite to be alongside of me to ensure that my vision in the company can continue to grow.
I want to talk a little bit about the blinders that you have to put on to stay in your lane. And you talked a little bit about it, Zach. Cleaning the toilets or hyper-focusing on the social media post that's going to go out. Like, Dre, we've talked about this. Like, at some point you have to acknowledge like where your time and energy is best spent. And it can be so hard when you're so wrapped up in it. So like, how have you, as you're building your team and you're working with people that you trust, how have you started to be able to let go of things?
It is hard, but I mean, you hit a point where you have no choice, and I think, to be honest, like what really pushed it for me, and like we had like a couple of people that we were already working with, but what pushed it for me was Techstars, because I quickly saw that there was absolutely no way that I was gonna be able to do this program, also have a full-time job, and also be running Opnr at the same time. Like it wasn't gonna happen. So it kind of forced it in some ways, which I was glad for, because before that it was a little bit harder, I think, for me to let go of certain things, because also like I'm a developer, so I like being in the stuff. So I had to kind of back away from that and really start thinking about more the strategy of the company overall and really like where we wanted to head and how fast we wanted to get there. And I'm like, I can't do that if I'm still in the weeds. As Monica Wheat always says, our Techstars managing director, you need to be working on your business and not in it. And I now truly understand that.
Keith, Chaney, you told me that you work with family and friends, which feels very brave. How does that work out? And how do you manage that? Because if something goes wrong, it's not just somebody you're working with, it's somebody that is really intertwined in your life.
Yes. And for clarity, two of my co-founders I've known since undergrad, so over a decade, and then my third co-founder is actually my sister. And so I think there are pros and cons to that. The cons are obviously you have to consider that there could be potential ramifications on the relationship. You want to make sure you have, again, boundaries. I'm big on boundaries lately because I'm learning how important they are. But I think the pros for me have been essentially like their credit score. I know them really well enough to where it's a bit easier to kind of, on your last question, let go of some of the things, especially the tech things. Like two of them are techie. I couldn't build Peadbo if you paid me $1 million, although I'm asking for $1 million. And so knowing that they have this work ethic, knowing that they're going to come to me with problems because we've been through things together, it makes me sleep a lot better at night than I would if it were just someone I was, maybe paired with or kind of linked up with, and I don't necessarily know if they're going to do the work. So it's been great so far. Hopefully it stays that way.
And Zach, I know that you've had your own experience working with family and friends, and if you'd like to, just touch on that.
Yeah. So Keith, enjoy that ride. So we, no, and granted, I hope that it is a continued success. So because many family businesses end up flourishing really well when that complementary skill set is implemented on the cap table. For me, wasn't the greatest. We owned cosmetology schools in the state of Michigan, and my family and I worked with each other. But there were complications with that because the vision and passion weren't aligned all the time, and we ended up not having the right people around us because we felt, again, in a family of entrepreneurs, we felt we could just do it ourselves. So that ended up not making it. Thankfully, I got out before the family did, but again, it was not a good effort. But again, family businesses do succeed, and I hope that yours does for sure.
Keith Brophy, I want to touch a little bit on one of the things that I've noticed from my year of getting to work with you and getting to work with people who work with you is, I mentioned it when I came up here to start the panel, you build people up and you encourage people. And one of the moments I got to see it was actually when I was in Grand Rapids in September, and I got to go to the very cool event, and I'm going to not know how to say it, but it was the 100 Ideas thing, and Dre won $10,000, and it was so cool. And to see how excited Keith and the team were for Dre, even though Dre worked for them at the time, but to see her and to encourage her, I was like, I have never been around that. Now, keep in mind, I come from a journalism background, so I work with media personalities, so it makes complete and total sense that I have never been around that. But Keith, I'd like you to touch a little bit on your motto in life and why you have taken this on as a challenge, because there are a lot of people who would not slow down their path to bring other people along with them. And the unfortunate reality is I think we see more of that than we see with what you're doing.
Yeah, well, mentoring and supporting is rewarding and a noble thing to do. It's also kind of self-serving as you invest that time. And I like to think I don't do it for the self-serving reasons, but because it just makes the journey richer, deeper, and more meaningful. But yeah, I've worked with a broad range of colleagues at multiple companies where I've been in a leadership position, and as I've built up teams, team members have come on board. And I've joked with some of the team members where we've worked together a couple of times, either I must be a really good leader or you must be really dumb because you seem to keep coming on board on the teams that I'm leading. But joking aside, I think what it is you get to know each other and you can bring out the best together. Teams can bring out the best in leaders, teams can bring out the best in teammates. And early in my entrepreneurial journey, I used to think it was a matter of more of kind of imposing the will of the business, almost kind of hammering team members into the mold that would fit. But over the course of many years and decades, and the wonderful gift of working with people in different situations and seeing people grow in their careers, you start to realize we all have our quirks and our strengths, and a big part of success in building a entrepreneurial business is learning how to work with the quirks, with the weaknesses as well as the strengths. Don't try to hammer out the weaknesses or the quirks, but just build together and build around them in kind of this interlocking team. So that is one thing I value very much, is the team cultures, the team commitment, the team trust, really behind every single successful effort I've been involved in.
Yeah, can I say something with
absolutely.
that? Yeah, and I know this is out of the realm, but I wouldn't have known or met people like Dre without Keith, and that's part of that cascading waterfall effect. When you get the right people on your team, they'll introduce you to the right people that will fill the rest of the company. So we grew in 4.5 years to 50 full-time employees and about 150 doctors across all 50 states in 4.5 years. But I couldn't have done it without people like Keith and Dre by my side. So definitely, I want to encourage that. It's you almost have to get out of your own way and get people that know and have the experience of how to run and operate businesses in a much bigger scale than you can, but still follow that dream and have the people that are willing to share in that passion, like Dre has shared in the passion alongside of us. So.
The topic for the panel today was obviously mental health and the entrepreneur, and we could have got up here and had everyone go down the line and talk about their own mental health issues. I mean, but 5 of us, a couple hours up here, no big deal. But I really wanted to focus on like what sets a lot of that stuff off, because a lot of mental health concerns tend to be comorbidities, so they exasperate one another. And with that comes learning about your own coping mechanisms. And I want everyone to run down. Keith Brophy, I'm going to start at the end there with you, and just tell me what is something that you do in life to make your mind, your head, your heart feel a little better. And it doesn't have to be something physical, because one of the things I think we've heard up here with all of the different names that have been thrown out there, Start Garden and Techstars, is the community and how you can infiltrate yourself in that in like a nice little bubble, like a little blanket wrap up, and utilize those people to be your support system, because it does feel so alone. And then if you add depression, anxiety, ADHD on top of it, it can just feel like you're never going to get yourself up to where you want to be. So Keith, let's start with you, because I know you've got lots of hobbies, and I know that they're all like ultra marathoning and all of that stuff. So what is it in your life that really kind of settles you?
Sure. I have a number of settling techniques, and I've evolved them over the years, and boy, did I need them. That first company I launched, Sagestone, which grew like a rocket ship, kept me immersed and very mentally unhealthy for about 5 years straight, with extreme sleep deprivation and many other things going on. And I've always been grateful looking back at it that I survived it in a way. But towards the end of that stretch, a good friend and mentor of mine sat down with me and he said, Keith, there's only one way that I see people like you make it with a sense of purpose and happiness in life, because you're just working so hard. And he said, it's work hard, play hard. And I know that's kind of a cliche saying, but it came at the right time for me, because I realized I needed to very tactically up things I did outside of work. So I'd run marathons, prior to starting that company, Sagestone, but I'd quit for those 5 years pretty much. And over the years since, I'd do marathons, ultra marathons. I did a 50-mile races through the mountains, that type of thing. Do them slowly, but I do them. But another recent finding is hot yoga. That's really amazing because it demands such full focus. And I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm like often the only guy in a class of 25 women, which I think is really weird because hot yoga would have benefits for everybody. But I do it. It helps me stay fresh and focused for our Mentavi Health challenges. The last thing I'll add that came about over the last few years is I write haikus, It's very clearing and totally shifts your focus around team problems. And I even published a haiku book on Amazon, largely just for the fun of it. So those are my coping mechanisms, but they work.
Just publishing a book of haikus for the fun of it. I love that. Keith, you talked about your non-negotiables, one being reading to your girls, watching Encanto. What else is on the list?
One thing that I do, and I've actually done this since even before Peadbo, is on Instagram almost every day. I'll post 7 things that I'm thankful for, and it's usually something really basic, like that cereal I just ate. But what I found is when I don't post that, people will DM me like, "What's going on? Where's my list?" This is like my favorite part of the day.
They're checking. They're checking in on you.
It just helps me to, like, all the shit going on. Like, there's still so much little stuff that I should be grateful for. And for the non-negotiables, in addition to the girls, I'm not doing ultra marathons, but I have to work out. I have to sleep at least 7, non-negotiable 7. And it all comes from, the thing that my dad always said: if it costs you your peace of mind, it's too expensive. And so I just keep that at the core of how I try to run my life. It's like, that thing is very attractive, but how much is it going to cost you? And is it worth it? And if it costs you peace of mind, then it's not.
We got just 5 minutes, so I'm going to get to Dre and Zach, and then if there's any questions real quick, otherwise they're going to be around here. Dre's here for a while. Like, if you need to ask her some stuff, she's got some time. But Dre, what's going on in your life right now that's calming?
Yeah, for me, I think it's visualization is huge for me, community, music, and physical activity. So, like, music, obviously, like, I've been playing instruments since I was like 4 years old, so it's always like a happy place for me, so I love doing that. Physical activity, I too am kind of like Keith. I tend to be on the extreme end of things. Like, I don't just do yoga, I like to do Bikram. Like, I don't just like to cycle, I'm like tearing up the Peloton every day. So, but those are things that really help me burn off extra energy, and that helps me with focus. The community thing is huge. Like we had already talked about, just like the different like startup communities and people in the ecosystem have been a huge thing for me. I don't think I realized like how isolated you start to become like when you are an entrepreneur, because frankly, like, your family doesn't want to hear about what you're doing all the time. Your friends don't want to hear about what you're doing all the time. Like, no one wants to hear about that every day except for your co-founders, like, to be perfectly honest. So it's like you kind of have to balance this thing that is inside of you that you want to talk about all the time, but you just can't. And then lastly, I think the visualization, like, that's always been a huge thing for me. Like, if I picture myself in the situation that I want and like how I want it to happen, like, I feel like I can just make that stuff happen. Like, it's worked really well for me. Like, if I actually see myself there, if I see myself signing the paper, it makes a huge difference for me to stay focused.
And Zach, finally to you.
Yeah. So for myself, I don't do any of the marathons or exercise. I was sweating just walking up the stairs. So for me, ADHD is my superpower. That's something that I absolutely love having because I use it as an advantage. So it's not a disability, it's an ability. So for myself, my ADHD is focused around business, and anything business I thrive on. I get energy from. I feed off energy from other people's business success, business failures, my ability to tear apart a business model and to be able to figure out how to solutionize around it. Love that. So that's really one of my coping mechanisms is business, but another one is that work-life, that balance that you need with family. I have 3 kids, 11, 9, and 7, and a wonderful wife at home, and they're a huge support system for me. And I try and turn business off, but as an entrepreneur, it's 24/7. So that phone is still on. I try and leave it in the home office, but you can hear it ringing in the background. And as an entrepreneur, you're like, oh my gosh, is that a small fire that's going to become a big fire? And if I don't address it now, it's going to be huge tomorrow. And am I going to lose half the team, or am I going to lose nobody? And you got to be able to separate that and turn your phone off. So that's something that you got to do. But for me, ADHD in business it's fun.
Real quick, what you said about ADHD, what you said about ADHD reminds me of kind of my relationship and how it's evolved with like fear. For most of my career, fear has been this thing that like scared me. Oh, you fear of failure, fear of going against the grain, not doing what's expected. I've recently kind of harnessed fear and framed it of like this fear of not knowing if you could have done it, or this fear of being old and having a bunch of regrets for not shooting your shot. And that has actually turned into a bit of a superpower. Whereas, my daughters are gonna see me take this risk, whether I win or not. They'll learn from that, and when they have an idea or they have something they want to do, they'll say, "Well, I've seen it. I know that it's something you could do, and it's not the end of the world if it fails." And so that fear of never showing them what jumping looks like is driving me to take some risk and really just kind of put it all out there.
Teach me your ways. We need to chat later.
Hey, can I feed off of that? As Wayne Gretzky and Michael Scott of The Office said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So yeah, for sure, you got to turn that fear into an advantage. Yeah, I love that.
All right, this is our time. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. I'm going to add another thing to their plate. If you have something you want to ask them about, they're all very friendly and lovely. You can ask me too. Thank you guys for hanging out. I gave myself 2 shameless plugs for the podcast. It's called Refocused. You can get it wherever you listen. If you are interested in sharing your own ADHD story, I'm dead serious. I will get you my credentials. I'll probably do a little background check on you as well, just to make sure, because I care a lot about this podcast. So I'm here till Monday. My name's Lindsay Guentzel. You can Google me or whatever, chat with me after this. But let's give a big round of applause for all 4 of them. Because it's not easy ever to come up and, open the closet and share your skeletons, especially when you're amongst your peers. So have a great, great South by Southwest. And thank you so much, Midwest House, for such a lovely accommodations. I am so honored as a Minnesotan to get to be a part of it. So have a great weekend, you guys.